Leonidas Leo Garibaldi had always considered himself a self-made man. He grew up in a cramped two-room apartment on the outskirts of Naples, Italy, where the stifling summer heat mixed with the persistent odor of frying anchovies. Even at 10, Leo had resolved to surpass the life his parents had known, devoting every waking moment to reading, hustling, and, at times, gambling on the shaky promise that luck favored the bold. By the time he was 35, he had soared to heights few could imagine. He relocated to Manhattan, parlaying his street smarts and unwavering ambition into a booming real estate empire. This was the story that tabloids loved: orphan turned billionaire tycoon. Leo detested the word orphan applied to him. After all, it was largely inaccurate. His parents had been alive well into his teenage years, scraping by in a neighborhood that scowled at daydreamers. His father, Augusto, had hammered laborious hours at the docks, and his mother, Domenica, had taken in sewing from wealthier families. Their combined income was meager, but they were warm, honest folk who taught Leo that everything in life came at a cost. The cost of his success, ironically, was loneliness. His relentless push for wealth and recognition had carved out a canyon between him and authentic companionship. Women were drawn to him: his confident smile, his Mediterranean complexion, his mysterious accent that still clung to certain words in English. But many sought him for his status or what he could provide: money, adventures, a gateway to all that twinkled. So for years he had engaged in a string of affairs that started with heated passion, but always ended in disappointment. All that changed when he met Nadine Fletcher, a lawyer with piercing grey eyes and a brilliant legal mind. She was representing an artist whose apartment building Leo had purchased. The artist refused to leave, citing an obscure landlord-tenant violation. Instead of sledgehammering her arguments with his team, Leo took a personal interest, drawn by Nadine's uncompromising sense of justice. She matched him, blow by blow, not wilting once under his famously intimidating negotiation tactics. 2 years later, they married in an intimate ceremony on a penthouse balcony overlooking Central Park. Paparazzi tried to intrude, but the couple managed to keep the festivities private, ignoring the throngs of reporters outside. The photos of her sleek white dress and his crisp tailored suit nonetheless graced magazines like People and Vanity Fair. For a moment the world saw them as the golden couple, billionaire and brilliant attorney, forging an alliance that looked unstoppable. In their first year of marriage, Nadine became a philanthropic leader, pushing for criminal justice reform and pledging to help those she believed had been unjustly incarcerated. She opened pro bono legal clinics, championed innocence projects, and used her married name, Nadine Fletcher Garibaldi, to gain access to circles that might otherwise ignore such pleas. Leo, though less publicly, supported her financially and socially, introducing her to bankers, politicians, and even celebrities like Mark Cuban, with whom he was once tangentially acquainted through mutual business ventures. The combination of Nadine's passion and Leo's resources truly seemed unstoppable. But beneath that glittering surface, delicate fissures developed. Leo and Nadine each had towering ambitions that sometimes collided. She found him controlling, old school in his perspective that the man provides, even though she insisted on working as a legal powerhouse. He found her altruism admirable, though naive at times, especially when she defended individuals with questionable histories. Leo was always worried about scandal tainting the Garibaldi name. He couldn't help feeling uneasy when Nadine's philanthropic interests edged too close to the dark corners of society. Perhaps that was why he started to sense her pulling away, why the dinners felt quieter, the nights felt colder, and her once luminous eyes seemed haunted by secrets he couldn't quite pinpoint. They were 3 years into their marriage when Leo's first real suspicions took hold, and the heartbreak and eventual tragedy began to unfold. Darkness rolled in early on a mid-December evening, sapping the warmth from the Manhattan streets. Leo typically arrived home by 6, delighted to greet Nadine and share a glass of Chianti before dinner. But that night, He noticed two troubling things upon entering their triplex penthouse. First, Nadine wasn't there to greet him with her usual welcoming presence. Nothing unusual. She often worked late. Yet her phone was left on the marble kitchen counter, set to silent. Leo found it curious that she would forget her phone, given how it seemed surgically attached to her at all times. More disquietingly, her phone was unlocked. She never left it so vulnerable. Second, on the living room table lay a manila folder marked Inmate Nusher 389274, Bauer Correctional Facility, Confidential. Leo knew Nadine dealt with sensitive legal documents, but it was unlike her to be careless. A pang of guilt flared in him as he opened it. He trusted her with every fibre of his being, but the folder was right there, asking to be read, or so it felt in his swirling mind. Though guilt stung him, curiosity overwhelmed caution. He skimmed the typed lines, details about a man named Desmond Olson, aged 36, convicted of armed robbery, suspected involvement in a violent assault. The list of charges was extensive, yet Nadine's typed notes in the margins suggested doubts about the legitimacy of several charges. The subtext. Nadine believed Desmond Olson had been wrongly accused on at least one major count, potentially justifying an appeal. Leo frowned. He knew his wife was passionate about justice, but something about Olson's record seemed off. The deeper Leo read, the more he noticed that Nadine's notes included emotional responses, words like remorseful, anxious, in need of second chance. Was she forming a personal bond with this prisoner? Before he could delve further, the front door latch clicked. Nadine stepped inside, her heels echoing on the marble foyer floor. She froze upon seeing him hunched over her documents. For an instant, her expression was a kaleidoscope of shock, guilt, and anger. "What are you doing, Leo?" she asked, forcing an even tone. He raised both hands in placation, still holding the folder. "You left this on the table. Your phone unlocked. You just what? You decided to violate attorney-client privilege because you're curious?" Her voice was sharper than he'd ever heard it, a note of betrayal weaving through. A swirl of conflicting emotions slammed into him. "I was worried about you." She quickly pulled the folder from his hands, slid her phone into her pocket and breathed in deeply. "I appreciate your concern, but trust me, I have this under control. If you start reading privileged files, you put my entire case in jeopardy." There was a throbbing tension between them. Nadine's face was taut with frustration. She stood rigidly, as though bracing herself to hold back a dam of hidden truths. Despite her icy tone, Leo approached gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. I know how important your work is. I won't pry anymore." For a moment her eyes softened. She covered his hand with hers. "Let's not fight," she said quietly. They settled at the table for dinner, take out sushi from their favorite spot, though the meal had lost any pretense of warmth. Nadine scrolled through her phone, occasionally responding to texts. Leo felt a knot in his chest. Their conversation was minimal, a far cry from the lively chatter that had once defined their relationship. He tried to quell his suspicions. "She's a lawyer," he told himself. "She defends clients, even complicated ones. That's her job." Still, that simmering worry refused to go away. Who is Desmond Olson? Why does she care so deeply about him? The question echoed through Leo's mind, even as they bade each other good night. Later, in bed, Nadine faked sleep for so long that eventually Leo drifted off, uncertain and uneasy. Neither of them said the words out loud, but both suspected their marriage was careening into an uncharted realm from which neither could easily return. The next few weeks passed in a tense lull. Nadine's schedule became more erratic, phone calls late at night, weekend visits to the correctional facility, hurried text messages she tried to hide, and an air of secrecy that trailed her. Leo, torn between respect and fear, found himself slipping further into the role of an investigator. One Friday afternoon, Leo decided to drop by Nadine's midtown office unannounced. She had told him she'd be working with her legal partner, Julius King, on a new class action suit. Julius was a clean-cut man with a quiet personality. He always seemed somewhat intimidated by Leo's intense presence. When Leo walked in, however, the receptionist informed him that Nadine wasn't in. Julius, on the other hand, was open to speaking. In a small glass-walled conference room, Julius shuffled some documents nervously and offered Leo a seat. "What brings you here, Mr. Garibaldi?" Julius said with a polite, practiced smile. "Just hoping to surprise my wife. Thought we'd grab a late lunch," Leo replied. Julius cleared his throat. She left a couple hours ago. Said she had a personal matter at the Bauer Correctional Facility." Leo's heart gave a painful lurch at the mention of the prison. Desmond Olsen's prison. She's working on an appeal for a client there. Julius bit his lip, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Yes, Desmond Olsen, but I'm not sure I'm at liberty to discuss her cases." Leo nodded. "Of course, attorney-client privilege. I'm not asking for details." He paused, wrestling with his curiosity. "Is she deeply invested in this case? She's been distracted." Julius hesitated before responding. "Nadine's always passionate. But yes, I've noticed a different level of intensity with this one. She's poured hours into investigating every detail, late nights, phone calls, background checks. She even visited Olsen's family upstate. I'm not sure what she uncovered, but it's definitely personal." Personal. The word reverberated in Leo's mind like an alarm bell. "Thank you, Julius," he said, rising. "I appreciate your candor." Julius nodded, relief washing over him. "I hope everything's okay. Nadine's under a lot of stress." Leo left with more questions than answers. He battled conflicting instincts, the desire to trust his wife implicitly versus the gnawing fear that something was profoundly wrong. That night, Nadine returned late. Again, she tried to slip into bed without waking Leo, but he had been lying awake. The moment she settled under the covers, he turned on the bedside lamp. Startled, she half sat up, blinking. "Leo, are you okay? Where were you?" His voice was soft but firm. She sighed heavily. "I was at Bauer Correctional. We're on the brink of filing for a new hearing. I needed one last conversation with Desmond." Her casual tone made the hair on Leo's neck stand on end. "Nadine, you've been spending so much time with this one inmate. Why is he so important?" She pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Because I believe he's innocent on several charges. I could save him from a decade more in prison, maybe even get him out entirely. Isn't that worthwhile?" "It is," Leo said slowly, "but I can't shake the feeling that there's something between you two. Something more than the average lawyer-client relationship." Nadine's reaction was immediate. "That's absurd." Her cheeks flared red. "How could you accuse me of such a thing?" The intensity of her denial only deepened Leo's doubt. He noticed her lower lip quivering slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, exhaling. "I don't want to fight with you, Nadine. You're my wife, and I love you. The secrecy scares me." She huffed, swinging her feet out of bed, away from him. "I'm not the one who's turned our marriage into a detective story." Anger and hurt radiated from her voice. "Please trust me," she whispered, her back turned. Leo watched her hunched figure, an ache hollowing his chest. In that charged moment, he wanted to cross the bed and hold her, vow his eternal support. But a chasm of unspoken truths kept them apart. He clicked off the lamp, leaving them in darkness. Two silhouettes, neither knowing if the other was awake or lost in agonizing introspection. In the days that followed, Nadine's pattern of secrecy intensified. She occasionally wore a new perfume, a subtle scent of honeysuckle and cedar, which Leo had never bought for her. She received text messages at odd times, stepping out of the room to reply. Leo had always prided himself on forging connections in high places, politics, finance, law enforcement. In the midst of this suspicion, he discreetly reached out to an old acquaintance, Detective Malia Mori, at the NYPD. They had met years before when Leo's building development had sparked a legal tussle involving historical preservation. Malia had been the officer assigned to handle minor trespassing protests. Since then, they'd maintained a respectful friendship. Over coffee, Leo explained that he needed some background on an inmate named Desmond Olsen. He didn't share everything, just that he was concerned about whether Olsen posed a threat to Nadine. Malia raised an eyebrow but agreed to run a discreet check. She cautioned Leo that if Olsen was indeed dangerous, direct confrontation could escalate matters. A week later, Malia texted him, "Meet me at the Overlook Diner, 2 p.m. Leo arrived early, took a booth by the window, and tried to ignore the swirling pit of anxiety in his stomach. Malia entered, wearing a simple suit, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She slid into the booth across from him and handed him a thin file with a single photograph of Desmond Olsen, a gaunt, sharp-featured man with intense dark eyes. "Leo," she began softly, "Olsen's record is complicated. Yes, he was convicted of armed robbery and assault. The assault charge is questionable. There's an ongoing claim that evidence was planted by some corrupt detective. Nadine might be onto something if she's focusing on that angle." Leo scanned the file, seeing the details of Olsen's life. A troubled childhood, known to run with street gangs in Queens, multiple arrests, but no convictions for violent crimes until his mid-20s. "So is he truly innocent of what put him away?" Leo murmured. "He might be partially innocent," Malia said, "but I don't have the full details on his case." She tapped the file. "However, I can tell you he has a reputation for manipulation. Guards have reported that he's charismatic, able to convince certain staff members to smuggle contraband, do favors. He's had relationships with volunteers before, female volunteers. It's possible he's playing Nadine." Leo's head buzzed with a swarm of conflicting emotions. A faint hope that maybe this was just Olsen manipulating her, overshadowed by the sickening thought that Nadine could indeed be emotionally involved. He exhaled, feeling a twist of pain in his ribs. "Thanks, Malia," he said quietly. "I appreciate the heads up." On his way home, Leo received a sudden call from Nadine. Her voice trembled. "Leo, can you meet me at Solomon's Grill tonight? We need to talk." Solomon's Grill was an upscale restaurant they used to frequent on special occasions. That she'd suggest it for what sounded like a serious conversation sent a chill through him. When Leo arrived, Nadine was already seated at a secluded corner table, swirling a glass of Bordeaux. Her eyes darted toward him, betraying a mix of guilt and resolve. He sat opposite her. Hey, she echoed, offering a weak smile. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the din of clinking glasses and hushed conversations surrounding them. Finally, Nadine inhaled slowly. "I'm sorry I've been distant, but there's a reason. I care deeply about Desmond. He's not just another case, Leo." His throat tightened. "What do you mean you care deeply?" She reached for his hand across the table. "I love you, Leo. Please understand that. But I also see a man who has been unfairly demonized by the system. I got close to him because I wanted to believe in a redemption story. I wanted to see the good in him." Her voice shook. "And I did. He's intelligent, he's kind, when he wants to be. He's been supportive in ways I never expected." Leo's vision tunneled. "Supportive. Nadine, he's an inmate. How can he support you?" She hesitated, eyes watering. "He listened to me when I felt like you didn't have time, or when you were too busy with your business empire. He empathized with my frustrations in law, in activism. There were nights I'd call him, collect calls to the prison, and he'd be there, telling me everything was going to be okay." Leo's jaw tightened. "So, is this an affair?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "It's not a typical affair," she said, voice cracking. "We haven't physically, but emotionally I crossed lines. I confided in him more than I should have. I lost perspective." She drew in a shaking breath. "I'm telling you this because I want honesty between us. I think I love him. Not in the same way I love you, but I can't deny my feelings." Silence slammed down on their table. Leo's entire world felt as though it were caving in. His hands trembled on the white linen tablecloth. "Nadine," he whispered, "how could you—" A tremor of guilt rippled through her. "I'm so sorry. I never intended for this to happen." He swallowed, the sting of betrayal scorching his insides. "What now?" he managed. She raised her teary gaze, determination flickering within. "I need to help Desmond, not just with the appeal, but I need to see him freed. Right now, he's in solitary confinement on a bogus infraction. I'm going to do everything in my power to get him out of that place. And I want you to understand. Please." Leo forced back his anger, unsure if it was overshadowed by heartbreak or fear. "So, you want me to stand aside while you fight for the freedom of the man you've—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Do you realize how insane this sounds?" Nadine shuddered. "I know, but I can't turn my back on him." She stared at him with pleading eyes. "We can overcome this if you trust me. Please, trust that my love for you is real." Leo's throat felt constricted, and in that moment he could offer nothing but a tortured nod. He couldn't bear to face the future that was unraveling before him, yet his heart still yearned for Nadine. Part of him wanted to walk out and never look back. Another part burned with fear of losing her, and a small, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, everything could still be saved. A numbness settled over Leo in the following days. He struggled to focus on his business affairs, so he delegated a significant portion of his responsibilities to his chief operations officer. While his empire churned on autopilot, Leo found himself succumbing to bleak speculation. Was Nadine truly just emotionally entangled, or was something more clandestine at play? Every now and then, half-baked rumors drifted his way. Someone mentioned seeing Nadine at the courthouse with a mysterious envelope, or a guard at Bauer Correctional Facility was said to be suspicious of her repeated visits. Leo tried to ignore the gossip, but it clawed at him every moment. It was a chilly afternoon when he decided to confront Nadine again. She was in her study, a small corner room with mahogany shelves packed with law books and philanthropic brochures. He stepped in and saw her hunched over her desk, rifling through a stack of papers. "What are you doing?" he asked softly, though his voice quivered. She spun around, startled. Her eyes showed the faint circles of sleepless nights. "I'm finalizing some documents for Desmond's case." Leo's gaze flicked to a blueprint-like sheet on her desk. It looked suspiciously like the layout of Bauer Correctional Facility. Each corridor, cell block, and guard station was drawn in meticulous detail. Something primal twisted in his gut. "Nadine, what is this?" She quickly flipped the paper. "It's nothing." But the flush spreading across her cheeks spoke differently. He stepped forward, quietly shutting the door behind him. "You have a plan of the prison. You're not— Are you helping him do something illegal?" She pressed her lips together, tears welling in her eyes. "He's in danger, Leo. He's been beaten twice, maybe by guards, maybe by other inmates acting on guard orders. I can't stand by and let them kill him slowly. Every formal complaint I've filed is ignored or buried. The system is broken. He's supposed to get another hearing, but no judge is assigning an urgent date. If this goes on, Desmond won't survive. I have to do something." A cold sweat broke across Leo's forehead. "That's madness, Nadine. There are other ways, legal ways. Bribing a guard, helping him escape, that's a crime. You'll go to prison yourself." She looked down, voice shaking. "I know, but if you saw what I did, his bruises, his face so hollow. They're trying to silence him because he has evidence of corruption inside, evidence that could topple certain prison officials. It's more dangerous than you think. I can't let him die in there." For a long moment, Leo stood silent, torn between fury and heartbreak. Nadine was a brilliant legal mind. She had to know the risks. But love, obsession, or guilt had driven her to the brink. Finally, he reached out and gripped her shoulder gently. "Nadine, you can't do this. If you love me at all, if you value our life, you'll stop." She winced, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Leo. I do, but I love Desmond too. I can't just walk away." The statement sank in like a dagger, twisting and wrenching. For the first time in his life, Leo felt powerless. He breathed in sharply, trying to focus. "Tell me what you're planning." She hesitated, tears spilling down her cheeks, then confessed in a trembling voice. She had identified a guard, Arthur Finn, who was financially desperate. Nadine had used a shell account, funded by a chunk of the Garibaldi fortune she had access to pay off the guard. He was supposed to leave a certain door unlocked at the laundry area, leading to a fenced courtyard, and from there, a blind spot near the southern watchtower would allow Desmond to scale the wall. Leo's mind reeled. He had pictured countless possible confessions, but not this. She's financing an actual prison break. His voice rasped. "This is bigger than you realize. There'll be a manhunt. Guards, police, everyone will come after him. If it fails, you're indicted." She clutched his arm desperately. "That's why I need your help, Leo. You have resources, connections. If we plan it right, we can get Desmond out of the country, maybe to a place with no extradition." He pulled back, shock turning to anger. "Have you lost your mind? You're asking your husband to help you run away with your lover?" She froze, color draining from her face. "It's not like that. I'm not leaving you. I'm just making sure he's safe, and then I'll—" He let out a bitter laugh, tears threatening to spill. "God, Nadine, this is insane. You're turning me into an accessory, or at the very least an accomplice after the fact. Don't you see how this ends? The second we try to help him escape, the FBI, the marshals, they'll all be on your trail. The press will crucify you, crucify us." Nadine swallowed, her gaze flitting to the hidden blueprint. "I've come too far. The wheels are in motion. If I back out now, Desmond is doomed." Leo shook his head. "So this is your final choice. You'd risk everything. Our marriage, your career, your freedom. For him?" "I'm saving a life, Leo," she whispered. "That's worth the risk." A storm of emotion burst inside him. He had never felt so helpless. "God help you, Nadine," he said in a ragged voice, "because I don't know if I can." 2 nights later, Leo sat alone in the penthouse living room, nursing a glass of scotch. Nadine was out again, presumably meeting with the guard or finalizing details. He stared at her wedding photo perched on the mantel. How simple and radiant they'd been that day. Her bright smile, his shining eyes. Now, each passing moment felt like a step toward an inescapable doom. In his haze of desperation, an idea crystallized. What if I pull enough strings to ensure Desmond's transfer to another facility, somewhere safer? Then Nadine won't need to orchestrate a break. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through contacts until he found Senator Clark Morrow, a power broker in the realm of criminal justice reform. Though they weren't exactly friends, they'd had some mutually beneficial dealings. It took an hour of calls and promises of future campaign donations, but eventually Senator Morrow agreed to expedite a request for Desmond's transfer to a medium-security facility rumored to have less corruption. The senator's staff assured Leo that the paperwork would be filed first thing in the morning. Buoyed by this potential lifeline, Leo waited up for Nadine, who returned close to midnight. She looked exhausted, her cheeks tear-streaked. "Leo, He held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "Hear me out. I called in a favor. Desmond might get transferred out of Bauer soon. A safer place, with a better chance of a fair hearing." Nadine froze, searching his eyes. "What? What are you talking about?" "I spoke to Senator Morrow. He's going to push for a transfer. If it happens, Desmond won't need to escape. You won't become a fugitive's accomplice. We can do this the right way. No illegal breakouts, no permanent damage to our lives." He stood, drawing closer to her. "We can fix this, Nadine." She stared at him, tears of relief forming, until her expression twisted into despair. "But I already set the plan in motion, Leo. Arthur Finn's expecting a payout tomorrow. Desmond is expecting the door to be left unlocked in 2 nights. She pressed her palms against her temples. "If I pull out last minute, Desmond won't trust me. He'll think I betrayed him. He could expose my involvement and if the guards find out, they could kill him on the spot. Don't you see how dangerous this is?" A taut silence stretched. Leo realized the scale of the labyrinth they were in. "We can still try. We'll get a message to Desmond. We'll tell him about the transfer." Nadine shook her head. "You don't know how paranoid he's become. He doesn't believe in politicians or deals made behind closed doors. He's convinced it's a trap. If I tell him to wait, he'll think I've betrayed him." She sank onto the sofa, covering her face with trembling hands. "Either way, we lose." Leo hovered, wishing he could cradle her, erase her anguish. But a dark fury also lingered beneath his concern. "You created this nightmare," he said quietly. "We can still salvage something if you trust me. I'll make sure he's safe, on my word." She looked up, anguish etched into her features. "I want to believe you. But Desmond, he's survived by trusting no one but himself, and maybe me. I don't know if your word is enough for him." Leo clenched his jaw. "Then maybe you have to let him try." His voice was grim. "If he's that far gone, maybe neither of us can save him." The thought hung in the air like a final omen. Nadine sobbed softly, torn between two men, two allegiances, two possible paths, each riddled with heartbreak. The day arrived like a funeral bell. According to Nadine's plan, the attempted escape would happen at 1 a.m. She'd arranged for Arthur Finn to drop off a rope ladder and disable certain security alarms. Meanwhile, Nadine insisted on being near the facility that night, waiting in a rented SUV not far from the perimeter, ready to drive Desmond out of state. Leo, in a desperate bid to stop the madness, had tried to sway Nadine. He pleaded with her, tried to show her how catastrophic the outcome could be, but she was determined. "If you won't help," she said, "then stay out of it." As midnight approached, Leo's worry grew unbearable. He couldn't just do nothing. He tore out of the penthouse in his black Mercedes, racing through the nearly empty streets toward Bauer Correctional. He had no clear plan, only the pounding realization that if Nadine was caught aiding a breakout, her career and possibly her life would be over. At 12:30 a.m., he arrived at a discreet parking lot a quarter-mile from the facility's fence. The imposing grey walls and floodlights towered in the distance, a grim fortress. Off to the side, he saw a white SUV with tinted windows, Nadine's rental. His stomach churned. He made his way stealthily. Despite the darkness, the yard was well lit. He spotted a figure near the south wall, Arthur Finn, presumably. The guard was fidgeting, glancing nervously between the watchtower and an interior door. Then, from across the fence, Leo glimpsed Nadine, half hidden behind a row of trees. She was wearing dark clothes, hood pulled up, her posture tense. "What am I doing here?" he wondered. "Am I going to stop her, or help her?" Suddenly, a muffled clang echoed from inside. A figure scrambled up and over the wall, Desmond Olsen. His build was wiry, but he moved with surprising agility. Finn tossed him the rope ladder, and Desmond slid down the opposite side, landing outside the prison grounds with a soft thump. Nadine hurried forward, motioning for Desmond to follow her to the SUV. That's when all hell broke loose. A klaxon blared, piercing the night. Sirens lit up the walls. Guards shouted, searchlights sweeping the perimeter. Leo ducked behind a dumpster, heart hammering. He watched in horror as 4 uniformed guards rushed out, guns at the ready. Desmond sprinted toward the SUV, Nadine following close behind, her hand reaching out for him. It was a heart-stopping race, bright lights dancing across the razor-wire fence. In the chaos, Finn vanished into the darkness. No loyalty, just the hush money in his pocket. Leo couldn't let Nadine get shot or arrested. He stepped out, yelling, "Stop! She's not armed." But it was too late. Shots rang out. Leo watched as Desmond jerked mid-stride, collapsing to the ground with a strangled cry. Nadine froze, then dove to her knees beside him. Another shot whizzed overhead. By some miracle, the guards hesitated just enough, possibly uncertain who was who. Leo rushed forward, arms raised in surrender. "Don't shoot!" he bellowed. I'm unarmed!" The guards reached Nadine and Desmond in seconds. Desmond lay on the ground, blood pooling around his side. He gasped for air, eyes wide with terror. Nadine was frantic, pressing her hand to his wound, sobbing. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Desmond, please!" Leo dropped to his knees beside them, ignoring the guns trained on his back. "Nadine!" he rasped. She looked at him with desperate eyes. Desmond's breath rattled, his gaze locked on Nadine. With a trembling hand he brushed her cheek. I'm sorry," he choked out, tears sliding down his face. Then his eyes rolled back, body going limp. Nadine screamed, a raw anguish sound echoing across the cold pavement. She slumped over Desmond's chest, her tears mingling with his blood. The guards shouted commands, cuffing Nadine, pushing Leo aside. In the flashing strobe of red lights, Leo realized that everything had come undone. Desmond was dead. Nadine was almost certainly going to be charged with aiding in an escape. And Leo, he wasn't even sure what he had done, only that he'd arrived too late to save anyone. Time passed in a blur of interrogation rooms and frantic phone calls to attorneys. Leo used every resource to keep Nadine from disappearing into the legal abyss. She was charged with conspiracy to commit prison escape, though the district attorney hinted at more serious charges if evidence of deeper involvement surfaced. Public outcry was swift. The media latched onto the scandal: billionaire's wife, AIDS prisoner's escape, inmate killed in the attempt. Paparazzi circled the courthouse, the penthouse, anywhere the slightest glimpse of Nadine might be captured. Tainted by association, Leo saw business partners withdraw from deals, charitable boards quietly remove him from events. "You can't buy your way out of everything," the tabloid sneered. At first, Nadine was held without bail, pending a hearing. In a private cell block, ironically, at the same facility where Desmond had been locked up, she awaited her arraignment. She refused to see Leo for days, perhaps out of guilt or despair. Eventually, through the efforts of Julius King and a small legal dream team, Nadine was granted bail, set at an astronomical figure that Leo readily paid. She came home to the penthouse, awaiting trial under house arrest, an ankle monitor affixed to her slender leg. The once lavish rooms felt like a mausoleum. She spent hours in the study, ignoring the press that gathered outside, ignoring phone calls from so-called friends. Leo tiptoed around her, battling his own conflicting emotions: rage, sorrow, betrayal, lingering love. One evening, after a silent dinner, he found her sitting on the living room floor, flipping through old photographs. There were pictures of them at their wedding, at fundraisers, on a beach in Maui, smiling and carefree. Nadine gazed at them with hollow eyes. He lowered himself beside her. "Nadine," he murmured, "talk to me." She stared at a photo of them toasting champagne on a yacht. "Was I ever happy?" she whispered. "Or was I always chasing something? No one else could understand." Leo gently took her hand. "You used to be happy. We both were." Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Desmond's blood is on my hands," she whispered. "If I hadn't orchestrated that plan, he'd be alive. I failed him." Leo's eyes stung with tears. "You tried to save him," he said quietly, though the words felt hollow. "He wouldn't have needed saving if you hadn't gotten so entangled," a cynical voice in his mind retorted. But he kept it to himself. She pulled her hand away, rising to her feet. "I'm going to bed," she muttered. He watched her vanish down the hall, helplessness weighing on him like an anchor. The trial loomed on the horizon, each day intensifying the media frenzy and the personal torment that threatened to shatter them both. The trial began 6 months later in a wood-paneled federal courtroom. Nadine's once sterling reputation as a champion of the underprivileged was now the target of prosecutors eager to make an example of her. The lead prosecutor, Roxanne Pruitt, portrayed Nadine as a cunning mastermind who had used her legal knowledge to orchestrate a dangerous escape. Despite Julius King's best efforts to paint Nadine's actions as a misguided rescue attempt to save Desmond from life-threatening abuse, the public sentiment was overwhelmingly negative. Testimony from Arthur Finn, who had taken a plea deal, was damning. He described how Nadine offered him $250,000 to help facilitate Desmond's escape. Nadine took the stand on the 6th day. Dressed in a plain black suit, hair pulled back severely, she looked very different from the charismatic attorney the city once admired. She spoke in a shaky voice, describing her motivations. "I feared Desmond would be murdered inside by corrupt guards. I was desperate." But the prosecution dissected every statement, pointing out that Nadine had numerous legal channels she could have continued to pursue. "You took the law into your own hands, Mrs. Garibaldi," Pruitt concluded. "You valued one inmate's life above the safety of citizens, above the very legal system you swore to uphold." Leo, sitting behind Nadine in the gallery, felt rage stirring. This is all twisted. But could he blame the prosecution for their perspective? Nadine had broken the law, plain and simple. A swirl of contradictory emotions clutched his heart. Pity, anger, regret, still a flicker of love. He wasn't sure which was stronger. Finally, on the 12th day, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on charges of conspiracy to commit prison escape and bribery of a public official. The recommended sentence, 5 to 8 years. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Nadine closed her eyes, tears leaking down her cheeks. Leo felt like the floor had dropped beneath him. He stared at her, wanting to hold her, but the bailiffs were already ushering her away. Her parting glance at him was filled with sorrow and resignation. For the first time, Leo realized they might lose each other forever. Nadine's sentencing hearing took place a month later. Character witnesses, fellow lawyers, some philanthropic figures pleaded for leniency, citing her history of good works. Even Leo testified, offering an impassioned speech about her empathy, her desire to protect the vulnerable. The judge listened solemnly. In the end, she delivered her sentence. 4 years in a minimum security facility with possible parole after 2. The gallery erupted in a subdued hush. It was the best outcome Nadine could have hoped for, but still a prison term. Leo found her in a corridor outside the courtroom afterward. 2 guards waited to escort her away. She stared at him, eyes full of heartbreak. He managed to take her hands in his. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I couldn't save you from yourself." Her expression was a mixture of guilt and gratitude. "You tried. This is on me." She paused, voice trembling. "I love you, Leo. I always have. But I lost my way." Hot tears blurred his vision. "I'll wait for you," he choked, though he wasn't entirely sure of his own words. So much had broken between them. Could it ever be repaired? She looked like she wanted to embrace him, but the guards stepped forward, stern. Nadine nodded at Leo, tears streaking her cheeks, and let them lead her away. That was the last time he touched her before her transfer to Camden Women's Facility. In the days that followed, Leo walked through life like an automaton. The scandal decimated his social standing, at least temporarily. News headlines recast him from unstoppable billionaire to tragic spouse of a criminal conspirator. Some in business found him tainted, others pitied him. But in the quiet, lonely nights, Leo thought back to the boy he once was, hungry, ambitious, dreaming of a better life. All he had wanted was love and success. Now success felt hollow, and love had torn itself apart. Where do I go from here? He wondered. A year passed slowly. Nadine's incarceration gave her time for introspection. She wrote letters to Leo every week, describing her therapy sessions, her regrets, her resolve to atone. She was working in the prison law library, helping other inmates with appeals. She wrote, "In a strange way, I'm doing more good here than I did out there. It's ironic, but I'm finding purpose again." Leo visited once a month, driving 4 hours upstate to see her. Their conversations were awkward at first. She felt shame, he felt sorrow. Yet, over time, they found a fragile new closeness. She spoke about rehabilitating her sense of self, about how she had conflated love with rescue. She confessed her emotional entanglement with Desmond had been rooted in a desire to heal her own insecurities, feeling overshadowed by Leo's wealth, desperate to prove her worth by saving someone who had no one. He listened, nodded, offered gentle words. Despite everything, he still loved her, but he also understood that the illusions of their perfect marriage had crumbled. Rebuilding trust would be an arduous process. Meanwhile, Leo took a break from the relentless corporate world. He placed part of his business under an interim board's management and traveled, sometimes to philanthropic summits, sometimes incognito to developing nations where he funded water projects or built shelters for orphans. The hush of volunteering quieted his tortured mind. One day, he found himself in a small Haitian village, working alongside local masons to construct a school. Sweating under the hot sun, he realized he was in many ways living his father's legacy, hard, honest work. For the first time in years, Leo felt a flicker of genuine peace. Maybe this is the path to healing. He continued writing letters to Nadine, describing his travels, the children he met, the new perspective on life he was forging. She wrote back, proud and supportive, even from her confines. Slowly they transformed a tragedy into an impetus for personal growth. In Nadine's second year of incarceration, she was granted parole for good behavior. On a crisp autumn morning, Leo waited outside the prison gates, leaning against his black Mercedes. The leaves were turning red and gold, swirling around in a gentle breeze. When Nadine emerged, she looked thinner but composed. She wore plain jeans and a sweater, her hair grown longer, cascading around her shoulders. Their eyes met, and for a second, both hearts trembled. Then, wordlessly, they embraced. The sun felt warm on their skin, a new beginning burning in the gentle rays. On the drive home, conversation flowed tentatively but gently. They skirted around the painful memories, focusing on the future. Leo had prepared a small apartment for her in a quiet part of the city, away from the glaring press. His penthouse no longer felt like home for either of them. It held too many ghosts. Over the next weeks, Nadine met with her parole officer, joined a support group for ex-offenders, and attempted to rebuild her life. She found modest legal work at a non-profit that helped families dealing with wrongful evictions, a far cry from her old high-profile practice, but a chance to help people without the burdens of tabloid scrutiny. Leo visited her place often, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sharing a meal. Their dynamic was subdued but meaningful. They laughed occasionally, reminisced about simpler times. They argued, too, about the future of their marriage, about whether they could truly bury the past. One chilly December evening, they sat on her small balcony, sipping tea. The distant skyline of Manhattan shimmered. Nadine wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "I know everything has changed," she said softly. "I don't expect you to just pick up where we left off." Leo stared into his steaming cup, then glanced at her. "I'm not even sure where to begin," he admitted. "I still love you. But the trust." She bowed her head. "I understand. And if you need distance," he set his cup down. "For so long I clung to illusions. We had a life that looked perfect from the outside, but maybe it was always lacking real vulnerability, real connection." He turned to face her fully. "We can build that now if we're willing, slowly, carefully." Tears sparkled in her eyes. "Yes, I'd like that." In that moment, they both realized that while the tragedy of Desmond Olsen could never be undone, it could become a catalyst for their own emotional maturity. They reached across and held hands, letting the night sky witness their tentative vow to try again. The tragedy that had erupted from Nadine's affair of the heart with a desperate inmate left lasting scars. Desmond Olsen's name became a cautionary tale in legal circles. Some insisted he'd been a manipulator, others labeled him a tragic victim of a broken system. But for Nadine and Leo, his death became a grim reminder of the cost of secrets, misplaced loyalties, and the labyrinth of human emotions. Over the ensuing months, Nadine and Leo dedicated themselves to authenticity. They confronted old wounds, openly discussed insecurities, and each committed to individual therapy. They did not rush back into living together, recognizing that rebuilding trust requires time and consistent effort. They kept weekly dinner dates, navigated the complexities of a quieter social life, and learned to share the parts of themselves they had previously hidden. Once the media frenzy died down, Leo resumed a portion of his corporate duties but maintained his involvement in philanthropic projects. Nadine continued her work at the non-profit, finding genuine satisfaction in small victories, helping a single mother keep her apartment, guiding an elderly couple through a legal maze. Their marriage was not the same glamorous institution it once was, yet in many ways it was far more genuine. Gone were the days of illusions and unspoken tensions. Each moment together was tinted with the knowledge that tragedy could strike if honesty and compassion were sidelined. In the quiet corners of their new lives, they discovered the profound truth that resonates at the core of every human connection. Love isn't about perfection or the absence of mistakes. It's about the willingness to stand by someone even when the darkness creeps in, owning the hurt, the betrayal, and choosing to forge a path forward, together. Despite the heartbreak and the scandal, they emerged with a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. The story of billionaire Leo Garibaldi and attorney Nadine Fletcher Garibaldi was no longer a simple fairy tale gilded by wealth and success. It was a story of resilience, of facing flaws, of forging an authentic bond amid the rubble of broken dreams. Their tale remains a testament to the human spirit's ability to find hope after devastation. It reminds us that every misstep can be a stepping stone, if only we have the courage to learn from it. In the end, the tragedy that befell them did not define them. Their response, rooted in humility, empathy, and an unwavering refusal to give up on the core of their love, did. And in that response lay the quiet, enduring spark of a love that refused to die. Secrets Beneath the Gilded Cage illustrates that even in the most dire circumstances, amid betrayal, scandal, and tragic loss, individuals possess a profound capacity for growth and transformation. Ambition, if left untethered by empathy, can lead to moral and emotional catastrophe. Yet the story also highlights how the very devastation that tears people apart can be the crucible in which deeper truths are forged. For Leo and Nadine, resilience lies in their willingness to confront their flaws, accept responsibility, and ultimately reaffirm the values that matter: connection, authenticity, and the hard-won redemption that emerges when people learn to face and heal the darkest parts of themselves. They remind us that genuine love is not free from storms. It is shaped and tested by them, often leaving scars that are as instructive as they are painful. And sometimes what begins as a romantic fairy tale must die so that a more honest, grounded love can emerge in its place.